when we fall into dark times, we might turn to friends or our families to share our woes. The only stranger we'd think to share our struggles with would probably be some sort of professional, like a career coach or a therapist, a counselor. But in this day and age, the reality is that the easiest way to find a community to support you through your hardships and to cheer for your successes is online. The only problem with that is that the love of the internet is fickle. It's entirely conditional. So what happens when a small, supportive community online becomes a larger, more judgmental mob of sorts? Well, to explore that a little bit today, let me tell you the story of my $10 life, his wife, and their 4 months on TikTok so far. But before I get into that, I just want to share a quick disclaimer, as always, that I'm just one person working on a time crunch to make these videos, so I cannot be 100% comprehensive or accurate all of the time. I'm only human, so please don't be shy to elaborate on something I'm saying or even correct something that I've said. Your contributions mean a lot and they're so interesting to read. And also my accent, just because people ask a lot, it's a Kiwi accent. I live in New Zealand. But with that said, let me introduce you to Ten. As far as I'm aware, Ten's real name isn't public knowledge, and even if it was, it doesn't impact the story. We're just gonna call him Ten today. But the point of this video isn't really entirely to analyze what Ten's been up to and what his wife's been up to. I'm not gonna like dig into their personal details. What I'm gonna share with you is what they've told us on TikTok, basically. But I also want to delve into a bit of the audience response, the psychology behind people interacting with their pages. It's really been playing on my mind lately, and I found it so interesting to look into. But I will start by giving you a rundown of Ten's situation and his wife's situation. And basically what we know is that Ten is a 40-year-old man. He announced this at one time. I'm not sure if he's had a birthday since then, but he was probably born sometime around the mid-1980s and raised in Busan, Korea. And he was brought up by a low-income family. When he was in his 20s, a typhoon hit and he injured his knee. There was an accident. I don't know. Sorry, the details are bare. I'm not gonna dig into his medical records or anything, but either way, unfortunately, that knee injury left him permanently disabled. So completely and entirely life-altering injury, right? That would suck. Now, Ten, he was actually wheelchair bound for 2 years in his 20s following this accident, and he regained the ability to walk eventually. I'm assuming thanks to medical support, but also just like sheer willpower, determination, you know. I think he was told that he would never walk again. So the fact that he got up and did it, pretty impressive. But still, even though he could walk, he could use his legs, Ten was advised by his doctor that he should avoid physical work at all costs. So he shouldn't be a labourer, nothing like that. He went on to become a med student, but of course Ten had bills to pay. He was in his mid-20s, he had to work, he had student loans to pay off, and so he started supporting himself by working office jobs. But Ten wasn't satisfied, I guess, with the prospect of working for someone else for the rest of his life, because he had big ideas of his own that he wanted to realise. And so over time, he, I guess, built up the courage to start his own business. And this was, apparently it was around the time that e-bikes and e-scooters were skyrocketing in popularity, and he had an idea for a product that would allow people to use those things more easily. That's what he said. Again, not sure what the product is or how it would be helpful. I'm also not sure, to be fair, like the time frame isn't clear to me. I don't know when this was, but I googled a couple things. Sounds like the first e-bike was introduced to Korea in 2010, and then there was this article from 2023 that I found in which they shared that the e-bike was quickly becoming a popular choice for short distance travel. So I guess sometime around the 2020s the popularity rose. And then e-scooters, they seem to have launched in Korea sometime around 2019. So knowing those things, I guess we can kind of pinpoint that Ten's idea was probably most likely birthed in like the late 2010s, early 2020s. I'm not sure, that's just my guess. So if that's true, that puts us a couple years back now, 6 or so years. But either way, although there is stiff competition in Korea when it comes to small businesses, which we will speak about later, Ten's product actually had an outpouring of support, so it seemed to be a really good idea. Like, the government got on board with funding, companies were interested, the whole thing was honestly shaping up to be huge, and Ten really believed in the impact that his idea could have. He thought that he had a banger. But work aside, things were also going well in Ten's personal life. He'd met a Slavic foreigner, as they call her, somewhere along the line, who he would go on to marry. And I'm also not familiar with this woman's name. I don't think either of them have announced their names, which is fair enough. But in order to like refer to her, I'm just gonna pull from her TikTok account name the same way I did with Ten, and we're gonna call her wife today, not to like reduce her to her marriage, because of course she's so much more than her marriage, but my intention is to make the story easy to follow, I suppose. And I think that calling her wife is the easiest way to achieve that, because it's what her internet presence revolves around. It's in her name. Like, it'll make her immediately recognizable to the ear. But wife's story goes, again, what we know of it. She moved to Korea just over 5 years ago. That's my best guess. And her plan was to study and to work in Korea, basically to settle down to live in Korea. But she had this horse at home that she loved with her whole heart. It was more like a dog than a horse, she said. And they'd been together for half of her adult life. She couldn't just leave them. And so she had them flown over as well. And from there, they could start a new life together. Of course, it wasn't easy leaving everything that she knew behind other than her horse. There were some struggles when it came to adjusting to this new culture. And, you know, in particular, wife ended up feeling very lonely. She didn't have her friends and her family around anymore. And so she took in a dog, which she named Mocha, and that helped some. You know, she was starting to build her own little small family in Korea. And as time passed, things got better for wife. She secured her Korean visa. She began to feel more settled in Korea in general. It became not only her home, but to some extent, her lifeline. See, wife had been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. It's called ulcerative colitis. And that's a painful autoimmune disease. It's characterized by inflammation of the digestive tract, which sounds terrible in itself, but it can lead to a whole plethora of side effects, things like anemia and weight loss and fever and fatigue and a loss of appetite, amongst other things. That's my simplistic understanding anyway, but the point I'm trying to get at is that in Korea, wife found her condition to be manageable, so much more manageable than it would be elsewhere. She felt safe in the hands of the progressive doctors there, and she was easily able to afford the expensive treatments more than she could overseas, because insurance in Korea covered 90% of the bill for her, which took her cost down from like $3,000 every 3 months to $300 every 3 months, and a plane ticket to Busan, where she would visit the hospital and receive the treatment. So wife's move to Korea was panning out pretty well, and then somewhere along the line, and amongst everything else that she was doing, wife met her to-be husband, Tin. Funnily enough, neither of them could speak the other's vernacular very fluently, and so they kind of used a language that was special to them to communicate. They used like English as a base, and then some Korean sprinkled in as well. It's quite cute, really. But regardless of the language barriers that they were facing, Tin and wife fell deeply in love, and so they made the vow to join their lives together. And they did. Tin moved in, I guess. I'm not sure, maybe they found a place together, but either way, they were living in a small village in the countryside so that wife could have her animals, and Tin was working on his business from home there. And while he was doing that, wife stays obviously involved. She was working on her own ventures, and she'd take care of her beloved animals as well, including 2 rescues that she'd taken in since she moved to Korea. So there was 1 cat that she found as a stray, and 1 horse that she rescued from a slaughterhouse. And occasionally, wife would invest her own money into Tin's business to support him, because she really believed in what he was doing, she said. And Tin would support her in turn with her decisions and her ventures. So they were very hardworking and independent people, but they supported each other. And they were making a positive impact on the world. You know, they were dedicated to improving the lives of animals, their fellow human beings. At the end of their workdays, they had the love of their lives waiting to greet them at home with open arms. So at this stage, life was looking really good for Tin and wife. You know, they didn't have to concern themselves with their finances to an extreme degree. They could afford to eat out at expensive restaurants without even batting an eye. There was no doubt as to whether they could provide for wife's animals or pay for her treatments in Busan. Overall, they were living a really comfortable life. They weren't rich, but they were well off. But unfortunately, we didn't meet the prosperous version of Tin and wife. Instead, we met the broken and ashamed side of Tin, and the stressed and overworked side of wife. And the story, in very simple terms, goes like this. Basically, Tin, over the course of his business operations, he had taken out a small loan, or multiple small loans, totaling up to $1 million or so. Just a small loan of $1 million. And that, of course, is because he had big plans for his business that he was working hard to achieve. But then, basically, mobility lost popularity as artificial intelligence gained it. And so investors bowed out as the market got smaller, and suddenly Tin was kind of trapped in there by himself. But Tin wasn't prepared to give up on his idea without a fight. He put everything he had into this. He pushed on. He was dropping tens of thousands of loaned dollars on every license and certificate he needed. And the business in general was pretty much burning money, but he exhausted his options. He tried everything he could. It's just that eventually, inevitably, the spark burned out. The business shattered inside his tight grasp and he didn't know what to do anymore. One day he approached wife and he told her in simple terms, "It's over. I'm broke." And thus began their upward struggle through life, because suddenly they were facing a mountain of debt and they had no idea how they were going to tackle it. Ten was saddled with $1 million in debt and he was newly unemployed with no business to help him pay that money off. And so in desperation, Ten did probably the most sensible thing he could do, and he filed for bankruptcy. And what happened is, apparently, I guess he had business loans and personal loans that he took out for the business. So his business loans were written off, but his personal debts weren't. And so he was left with $300,000 to pay off, and this is all US dollars that he converts it to. I've seen some people saying that this is, or no, I saw one person in a comment section saying for wife to be careful because it's like a common scam in Korea that I guess a Korean man will marry a foreigner and then gamble their money away and then they're stuck with the debts, but the debts aren't technically wife's, so she could just leave, but she really trusts that this is true. So I don't know, I don't want to jump to any conclusions. I just thought I'd mention that because I have seen it mentioned as well, so I didn't want to be disingenuous. But as far as my knowledge goes, my understanding is that these were business debts taken out personally, and so it wasn't going to get forgiven, which kind of sucks, right? But even the process to get to that point was kind of brutal. And listen, I'm not really privy to like how life in Korea looks, let alone how the legal system works. Everything that I'm about to say is stuff that I've Googled or other people's anecdotes from their time living in Korea or et cetera, you know. So I'm just gonna I'm gonna pull on that and do my best to paint a picture for you with the information that I have. It's not going to be a very detailed picture, think like Stickman, you know. So if you can add to the bare bones artwork, please do, because I don't 100% know what I'm talking about. I'd be really interested to hear more from someone that does. But from what I can gather, it is reasonably common actually for people living in South Korea to take on debt. An article written in 2012, it was entitled "The Culture of Borrowing, How Korea's Hyper-Emphasis on Achievement Created a Mountain of Debt." That details that at that time in 2012, the average debt to income ratio of Korean households was 155%. And to explain the reason that households were spending, I guess on average, 1.5 times the amount of income that they were generating per year, the author pointed to the phenomenon of competitive spending in Korea. It kind of encouraged them to splurge on things like after-school academies for their children, luxury goods like designer accessories, expensive cars, faraway vacations, and small businesses. Lots of people were opening small businesses. And in 2024, Statista found that small and medium-sized enterprises accounted for 80% of all national jobs. It's actually crazy how many small businesses there are in Korea. There was an article on the Korea Times. It was entitled "Korea's Labour Market Too Small for Its Talent." And in that article, it detailed that only 13.9% of jobs are in large enterprises. They go on to say that workers in micro enterprises earn just 54% of what large firm employees make. And so I guess for many South Koreans, working for peanuts for a small business is actually the best option they have, because it's better than the alternative of having little to no career prospects at all, right? The majority of people will either stick it out working for a small business or they'll start their own small business. And I do think that there's a cultural element to the mindset that achievement is king in Korea and you should strive to be above everybody else, so better education, a better job. I'd imagine there's a social status aspect to it. But I do think it also very much has to do with the job market. But if you want, this is what I've read, if you want fair working conditions and good compensation for your work in Korea, then the path most traveled seems to be you go on to attend a highly regarded university, secure a stable full-time job at a large or a foreign enterprise, and then you work hard to become a respected sort of upper level employee there. Like I read it, they shared, you basically have 4 choices in this order of preference. 1, you end up at a small local company. 2, you start your own company. 3, you end up at a large Korean company. Or 4, you end up at a foreign company. The foreign companies, especially American companies, treat their employees pretty close to the American global standard. Good pay, benefits, work hours, etc. Large Korean companies are next, but work their employees harder for about 20 to 30% less pay. So although it sounds pretty desirable, like the most desirable option, it's not necessarily easy to worm your way into a large, well-paying company. And I mean, the thing is, right, plenty of people are perfectly incredible, bright workers, and yet they might not be studious or book smart enough to go to university and graduate with honors. And I never went to university, I don't know what that means, but you know what I mean, go on to secure this amazing job. And even if everyone was cut out for a distinguished job at a big company, then good luck to them, right? Because the competition is crazy. We've learned that the majority of jobs just aren't going in those spaces. They're going in those small and medium-sized businesses that pay consistently low wages and oftentimes don't provide a great work-life balance, so it's kind of like the bottom of the pit. But I just want to be clear that I don't mean to paint an entirely grim picture of the Korean job market, right? On the other side of the coin, I want to highlight, I found this Redditor. They said, don't believe the TV dramas. People live life like anywhere else. Millions of people know they aren't going to get desk jobs at corporations. They go on to be mechanics, storekeepers, taxi drivers, factory workers, and whatnot. The vast majority of people have no interest or pressure to be at a prestigious job. Because I guess I probably came across a lot of the bad and less of the good in my research, right? Like, the reality is that everywhere has its pitfalls. The news and online anecdotes and stuff like that, of course, they are going to skew negative, or they're going to tend to, because people want to talk about the shit stuff. But I do feel like what I found could be relevant to Ten and Wife's story. Like, it could just introduce a little bit of a background idea of why they might have chosen to go with a business and put everything into it, you know. And so to continue with what I found, there was an article released in 2015 entitled Beyond the Miracle, Inequality in South Korea's New Economy. That article highlighted the prevalent issue of wealth inequality in Korea. And some stats that I saw included that around 15% of South Koreans live under the poverty line, while 30% maintain precarious jobs on fixed term, part-time, or even like indirectly employed contracts. I don't even know if you'd have a contract if you were indirectly employed. I don't know how that works. Like casual? Like a casual worker? I don't know. But anyway, workers getting by under those conditions had no retirement benefits or severance. So they're making less and they're getting set up for the future even less. And with that in mind, what this is all leading to is that it's not hard to understand, right, why people making a living off of volatile jobs might decide to throw the semblance of security that they do have to the wind to realize their chance of striking gold by starting a small business. It's a very common path in South Korea, honestly. The rate of self-employment sits at a massive 23%, so like a quarter of the population. But while the ambitions of small business owners might be through the roof and their work ethic might be unstoppable, the same can't always be said about the rewards they reap. An article written in 2015 entitled The Birth of the Insecure Class in South Korea noted that, quote, most small businesses are concentrated in vulnerable, low value added economic activities, such as small retail businesses, 35%, and restaurants, 31%. So often the services that these small business owners can provide to the public aren't exactly highly sought after. There's not really a demand for them, but there's a lot of supply. But the thing is that the barrier to entry can be low enough that it sort of entices prospective business owners, and then it disappoints them just as quickly as it reeled them in. The article that we were just reading, it goes on to state that half of new small businesses go bankrupt within 3 years. The bottom 20% of the self-employed population make an annual income under $10,000 with an average household debt of $90,000. 1/3 identify as being in the lowest class in South Korean society with little prospect for upward social mobility. So I came across some Redditors living in Korea who sort of shared their thoughts and experiences with small businesses in Korea, and they definitely sound prevalent. There was one Redditor that said brother-in-law ran 2 failed businesses, 1 chicken shop, and then a game room that failed during COVID. Now he works as a construction manager but is heavily in debt. Poor guy is going to work himself to death. And another Redditor shared, my wife's nephew has had so far 2 different restaurants, a cell phone store, and a tennis shoe store. All have closed in less than a year. His wife told my wife that he's going to save up the money to open a karaoke bar. And another shared, they said many owners realize that it's not sustainable and they go back to whatever industry they were in before, if they can. Some take on other jobs just to pay back the family and the friends who helped them get started. Others quietly shut down and carry the debt for years. It is sad, but it happens more often than people think. So I've definitely come to realize that opening a small business is oftentimes a high risk and low reward undertaking in Korea. It's a risk that many South Koreans are willing to take for the chance of prosperity and freedom, but the consequences of failure are potentially life-ruining. It's an investment that tends to have detrimental effects for the unfortunate 40% or so that don't find success in their operations. These entrepreneurs, they find themselves penniless, drowning in business debts, and living under the shame, the social stigma of their perceived failure. And what's worse is that although starting a business and accruing debt is strikingly common in Korea, and it's not unheard of by any means for people to be unable to afford the repayments, it is, as a whole, looked down upon pretty heavily in Korean society. I read an article entitled "No Squid Game, South Korea's Real-Life Debt Trap," and a bankruptcy judge said that culturally, failed entrepreneurs are socially stigmatized, so starting over is hard as people don't trust them. And then a personal bankruptcy lawyer in Seoul, they shared that if Donald Trump was a Korean, he probably couldn't have become president, having been bankrupt that many times. In the United States, corporate debt is more separated from personal debt. And they went on to speak to Yu, who was a woman who went into debt in 2002 to fund a movie that wasn't successful. It took her 13 years to pay off her debts, so they must have been pretty significant. But she said, in Korea, it's like the end of the world once you become a credit delinquent, that's what they call them. She said, all I wanted was chances to repay debt, but banks don't let you make money. And I know that sounds bizarre, or it sounds like a lie when you first hear it, because it's like, that makes no sense, but it is actually how things work to this day in a strange way. I don't really understand it, but when entrepreneurs fall in South Korea, there really isn't any safety net to catch them. They just free fall. And there are restrictions put in place that serve to make it harder for them to get back on their feet and repay their debt. It's very odd. I'm sure it makes sense in the legal system somehow, but I don't get it. But the bankruptcy judge, even they shared, those who file for personal bankruptcy face a long list of restrictions on employment. And listen, I can't tell you exactly what sequence of events led to Ten starting a business and that business collapsing, because I don't know that. What I do know is that what the bankruptcy judge explained is exactly the position that Ten has ended up in as of, what month was it? Maybe like July. Basically, the majority of his debt, his business debt, was forgiven by the court, but he's been left with this $300,000 to pay off on his own accord, which is a pretty massive sum. And I really have tried to research more into this. I really did look, but I can't find anything that I can understand in English. So I can only inform you, basically, of what Ten has said about his predicament on TikTok, and we're just gonna have to take his word for it. But strangely, this is what I've read from him, for at least the 1 or 2 years that it will take for his bankruptcy to be processed, his earnings are restricted to just over $1,000 a month. Anything more than that is siphoned from his bank account or his payslip, and for some reason, it's not even fed into his debt repayments. It's just gone with the wind from the way he describes it. I guess the idea might be that if you're earning more than that, then you can afford to pay off your own debts, so you're not allowed. But that's a harsh judgment, and it doesn't really make sense. So if anyone knows anything more than I do, please share, because I can't make it make sense in my head. But regardless of how much Ten has actually been allowed to earn for the past couple of months, Ten did have to find work again. So let me start our story with Ten and wife back at that stage. Basically, because bankruptcy is so culturally, societally looked down upon in Korea, Ten found that he was actually unable to secure another office job. He couldn't work with his brain anymore because people would see his records, see the bankruptcy on there, and they'd wave him off like a hovering mosquito. They'd squash him. And similarly, Ten wouldn't be able to start a new business because, well, his credit was ruined. So instead, he would have to do the one thing that he was advised never to do in order to survive. He'd have to do physical labor and honestly really whatever he could to get back on his feet. And so life had to change drastically for Ten and wife. Comfort became a thing of the past for the two of them, and so did having each other's company, because wife had to continue living rurally in their pet-friendly rental where she had consistent work and a close proximity to her animals, and Ten would have to move an hour away or 2 hours in traffic to the nearest city in order to find work of his own. And wife's family, when they heard about their predicament, they felt like it was the end of the road for her, so they encouraged her to separate from Ten, to file for divorce, to get away. But wife refused. The debts weren't legally hers, but she didn't just want to walk away from them. She intended to stand by her husband. She wasn't willing to give up the love that they had for each other and the long life that she knew they could lead together over these debts that he'd become burdened with. And so Ten found an affordable but very shoddy apartment in the city, and wife helped him move in. From there, wife took on as much work as she could in the countryside, and Ten picked up the odd job here and there until he finally landed a consistent but physically taxing warehouse job. And employees weren't treated well at Ten's company, is putting it lightly, I think, but the pay was alright, and it was work, so he stuck it out. And in the face of all of this hardship, Ten made the decision to start something that would honestly go on to change his life and wife's life, for better or for worse, very quickly. He opened a TikTok account with the intention of probably making some money on the side, but also documenting his life living in poverty in Korea. Obviously, he felt like that was interesting enough to share, and it definitely was. And so he donned his page with the name My $10 Life because he lives off of $10 a day, and he began making videos. At first, he was just filming clips from his day, cutting them together, and then commentating over them in Korean with English subtitles. But eventually, wife got involved in the production of his videos, and as far as my understanding goes, because she's a bit more fluent in English than he is, she'd help him craft his scripts in English so that he could reach a foreign audience more easily. And I'm guessing that she also probably assisted him with the post-production stuff as well sometimes, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Either way, both of their work, it was paying off. A relatively mid-sized audience began to develop around Ten and wife, and they were very supportive. And so Ten and wife, they made the decision to expand the My $10 Life cinematic universe, and wife opened a TikTok account as well. She called her page Debt Wife Diaries. And I think they had good intentions with sharing their lives with the world, aside from the obvious financial motivation that they most likely had, which is not it's not a crime, like, that's fine. But Ten also said that he wanted to reach people with the message that it's never too late to start something new, and you never have too little to do it. And if anything, he said that this massive debt, it wasn't the end for him, but rather it was a hard beginning, to a new life. And Ten hoped that other people going through a tough time could kind of look to his page for motivation to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and to keep moving forward. It was kind of we're all in this together was the kind of mindset. So Ten, I think, was hoping to find community, and he kind of found strength in the idea that powering through his conundrum and showing that could help somebody else. Because, to be fair, this isn't something that's talked about very much in Korea. This is like we kind of discussed, it's a shameful thing. He's openly said, Ten has, that he's lost friends that were in the same position, and they just didn't survive the pressure and the despair of the crushing debt. But he said that he didn't want to give up. He wanted to fight back. He didn't want to bow down to his debt and to his shame. He didn't want to hide it. I think he wanted to show that it was possible to be unwaveringly strong in the face of near insurmountable hardship. And his account, he said, over time it became less about money and more about the moral support of it all. It felt nice to have tens of thousands of people in his corner cheering him on. And it's just nice to know that other people care, I think. And then wife, on the other hand, what she wanted to document with her account was what it looked like to support someone you love when everything falls apart. And she was doing a lot, she was trying to balance now caring for her husband from a distance and also caring for her animals, herself, errands, work, family. So of course she was stressed, but just like Ten, she wasn't the type to just give up. And Ten wasn't alone in what he was going through, and she wanted to show him that, she said, and she did that often by cooking him a decent meal and bringing it to him when he was too exhausted to cook for himself, But also, because wife was not filing for bankruptcy, her earnings were not capped, to my understanding. I don't know if that's correct or not, but either way, what I know is that wife would make a real effort to put any disposable income that she had, after paying her necessities, of course, towards Ten's debt. So they were absolutely approaching this as a team, as one unit. Ever since Ten's business went under, they had both been incredibly cautious with their money and very frugal. Frivolous spending just hadn't necessarily been an option for them, Their idea of splurging became having a meal out worth $30 once in a blue moon, or, buying a secondhand air fryer for, $35, which I'm going to mention again later, so keep the air fryer in mind. It becomes a side character in this whole story. But basically, Ten and wife showed a willingness to do everything they possibly could to pay down Ten's debt, even though the shadow of, $300,000 looming over them was pretty intimidating. I mean, that's a lot of money. I tried to put it into perspective for myself, and I converted it from US dollars to New Zealand dollars. It's like $530,000. If I put every single cent that I earned every single year to paying that debt off, it would still take over a decade for me to be able to wave it goodbye. And that's not even a slightly realistic scenario. So they're in it for the long haul, but they were motivated to see it through. But the thing is that although they were very motivated, being in a scary amount of debt didn't change the reality of Ten's situation. He was still disabled, and holding down an intense physical job, it just simply wouldn't be feasible for him in the long term. And even without taking Ten's disability into account, his job was brutal. Wife even shared that it's common knowledge in Korea that people in his occupation die more often than you'd like to think. And after months of Ten working long hours, forced overtime, and accruing multiple workplace injuries, it got to the point that wife was concerned that Ten would join that statistic. She thought her husband was going to die on the job. So after some serious thought and probably some pretty intense discussions, Ten quit his warehouse job, his only source of income other than TikTok. And as always, wife was supportive of his choice. She had struggled to go on herself, to be honest, knowing that he was suffering to the point that he was even passing out at work. And because she would go to visit him to care for him when his health showed signs of declining, that was impeding her ability to earn money as well. So in the long run, I mean, she said that although a job at, say, McDonald's would pay less, at least it wouldn't destroy his health. At least they could both work. And she had faith in the knowledge that both she and Ten were not the type of people to just sit around like twiddling their thumbs, letting life pass them by. They knew they needed to work to tackle Ten's debt, and they were equally willing and motivated to do whatever it took. And so Ten, the plan was that he would go on to hunt down sustainable work in the city, I suppose, and wife would continue her usual non-regular employment, and she'd visit Ten whenever she could, whenever she had the spare time to drive into the city, which from my understanding is most days. And I do just want to pause for a second because I want to address the elephant in the room, the fact that, you know, they both have hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok and they consistently get millions of views per month. So when I said, you know, Ten's only source of income other than TikTok, you were probably like, yeah, well, he's making a lot of money on TikTok, so that's fine. And they also accept donations from viewers, so like surely they can't be struggling that much is what you might be thinking. I've seen that sentiment in the comment section a couple of times. And to be fair, listen, I don't want to discount the money that they're making from TikTok and donations. I'm sure they're helping out big time, because even since they started posting, which I think was like July of 2025, they've managed to pay down like $6,000 worth of debt. And in 4 months, that's really impressive. And of course, I don't mean to like discredit the work that they're doing, but an average of $1,500 a month is nearly 3,000 New Zealand dollars, and that's a lot of money to put away every month. So in my mind, yeah, they must be making a fair chunk of change off of TikTok all around, alongside the hard work that they're doing in real life as well, of course. They're very exhausted and they're really pushing themselves to keep up with TikTok and everything. But with that said, TikTok doesn't pay that well. I just want to like put that out there for people that might not know how these sorts of things work if they haven't done them themselves, which I haven't done TikTok myself. We don't have the creator fund in New Zealand, so I genuinely could not. But unless you're getting paid by a company to promote something on TikTok, or you're getting an insane amount of views, like you're getting tens of millions of views per video, then you're probably not really making that much. And the same goes, it's just short form content, like the same kind of goes for YouTube shorts, because the way you get paid through social media platforms themselves, obviously, is ads. And how it works is that basically you earn a revenue per milli, which is a revenue that you earn per 1,000 views, what advertisers are willing to pay you for 1,000 views on your content. On YouTube, long form content, you could be looking at upwards of, I don't know, $10, $15, even $20 per 1,000 views. It's very niche dependent. But on TikTok, you're probably looking at under 10 cents. And wife has actually confirmed, obviously it fluctuates, but their revenue per milli, their RPM, is something around 5 cents as an average, which means that they're probably bringing in, again, an average of like $50 per million views, if my math is correct, which it's usually not. But that's nothing to sniff at, obviously. $50 is $50, but compared to a platform like YouTube, where a long form video could net someone, say, like $10,000 for a million views, it's not really on the same level. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's underwhelming. So you might see millions and millions of views and go, oh, they're rich. Not necessarily. But now I can catch you up to the most recent point in their journey, I guess, which ended up being the catalyst for me making this video. Well, as I mentioned, Ten bought a secondhand air fryer when he found one that was in his budget, and he'd been wanting one, he'd been looking for months, because basically the oven in his rental, it didn't work properly, right? And it got to the point that when he was trying to cook on it, it was shocking him, and wife tried cooking on it, it shocked her. And Ten had been pretty brutal with the landlord after that happened, and he was like, you need to fix this, but the landlord wasn't exactly chomping at the bit to get it done. So the air fryer, it was a sensible, safety-conscious purchase for Ten. It was a cooking appliance that he had control over. But the only issue with the purchase, I suppose, is that Ten didn't tell wife about this pretty significant expense that he was incurring, you know, buying this air fryer for $35. That's That's half of what he lives off every week, $10 a day. So he did this sort of behind her back, if you will. He told TikTok about it even before he told her. And he seemingly intended to like surprise wife with the purchase and what he planned to make with it as well, which maybe they've discussed it previously. I have no idea. Wife never expressed any public upset over Ten's sort of undercover purchase. She never came out and was like, I'm really mad that he did this behind my back. But his followers kind of assumed that it was crossing a line, and they made it clear to him in the comments that they were like, no, you have to be honest with wife about what you're doing. And then on the other side of things, wife had visited a psychiatrist for the first time, and just from the way she described things, it kind of sounded like she was reaching her breaking point. She said, like, I love my husband, I want to help him, but I didn't take on this debt. And she said, even though we're trying our best, life has been really hard. And she grew up in an environment where mental health, seeking treatment, it wasn't really encouraged. It was kind of just get on with it. So the fact that she'd sought help is actually really admirable. I'm glad that she did that, because it is completely understandable that she's feeling really down and really like disgruntled about the whole situation, especially considering that she shared that she lives her life with the rule of never borrowing money. Her husband is just a different type of person, she says. And naturally now she feels like she's suffering for that, because she is. But what I really respect is that this goes for both of them, but we're talking about wife in particular now. She really makes the effort to never attack Ten publicly for any of his choices, anything he's done. And that really showed when Ten posted a video recently that was nothing at all like his typical vlog style content. Instead, it displayed a black screen with subtitles on top, and in this video, he shared that he thinks that he needs a break because things had just been so difficult lately. And Ten perceived that something that he was terrified of happening was happening. He felt that TikTok had started to stir up conflict between him and the one person that was there for him throughout everything before even he opened his TikTok account. And that was, of course, wife. TikTok was putting a wedge, almost, he felt, between himself and his biggest, if not only, close supporter, the person he loved more than anything he felt was being driven away. There was that disconnect there now, and wife was more important than social media, Ten said, and so he had to step away. And Ten made it clear that his break was indefinite. He said that he just needed a little bit of time to breathe and to think and to find peace again. He'd come to TikTok to connect with people who might understand his struggle to some extent. But in the end, he felt chased away by that disconnect that judgmental viewers had caused in his real life, in his relationship. And wife sort of responded on TikTok, which is interesting. She said that Ten and her hadn't been talking much as of late, actually. Like any married couple, she said, they argue, and there had been tension between them, which of course the viewers could pick up on. So she said that Ten didn't actually discuss his choice to take a break from TikTok with her, and although she appreciates the sentiment that he values their relationship over social media, love doesn't pay the bills, she said. But even though she was clearly frustrated, and you could tell, she was very level-headed in her response, and this is what I appreciate. She's not hiding anything. She's just not being douchey about it. Do you know what I mean? She's like, they have their boundaries with what the internet sees, and I think that's great. Instead of really pulling him down, wife basically said that she must just be the more rational one in the relationship. And, she feared that if she stopped posting, even with his account, but if she stopped posting, she was worried that the algorithm would bury her. So she just continues. No matter what her mental state is, she posts. But again, she acknowledged that, Ten is a different person. She understands that. She respects his decision. And really, that is life when you're in a relationship, I guess, isn't it? You either have to accept the differences that you have with this other person, or you embrace them if you can, or, you come to the conclusion that your differences are so strong that you just can't work together anymore. And then you have to end it, right? That's relationships. And of course, there's always some mess in between while you try to work things out. It's natural. So even though Ten and wife, their circumstances are extraordinary in some ways, what they're going through really is very human, to be fair. It's very relatable. It's very honest. And wife did sort of continue to speak on things. She responded to an inquisitive commenter. They wanted to know why Ten had decided to stop posting, and she said, honestly, you should ask him yourself, because I don't have the answers either. It's difficult for all of us, but he knows how important it is to me that he continues, how much I've invested in his blog. But he's decided to take a break now. I can't control him. Maybe he'll rest and come back. And from here, I'm going to start breaking down a little bit of the audience perception of Ten and wife's content. But before I get into that, I just want to make something really, really clear. And that is, well, a couple things actually. For one, Ten and wife have continuously expressed their gratitude for their supportive viewers, the ones that frequent their accounts and turn up in droves to cheer them on. And these people do exist, you know. There are some very, very gracious viewers that watch these videos and really try to open up a good faith dialogue or understand why things are happening, that are just there to experience maybe a different view on life, you know. And also, I certainly don't want to imply that anyone that is well-intentioned with their comments or anyone that is genuinely confused about the situation is making a negative impact. That input is valuable. It's just that even as a viewer, I've noticed that the negative responses to Ten and Wife's content have gotten more and more prevalent and honestly harsher, like a little bit more cruel, and it's just harder to ignore as their pages have grown. It's right up the top of the comment section every time. And to be fair, I don't want to make it sound like that's uncommon on TikTok or platforms like TikTok, right? Because it's not. What's been bizarre to me in this case though, that's really got my head spinning is, I guess it's because I've been there throughout so much of the journey that I look at it now and I'm like, well, nothing has changed though. Like Ten and Wife are still in the same situation they were in months ago when I first came across their videos. The information that they've shared has been consistent. They're the same mild-mannered, average, frugal people that they've been since the beginning. And yet people are starting to turn on them and question them more and more. And that kind of got my little overthinker fired up. I was like, why? What did change? You know, is it really just the audience that changed? And I think it might be to some extent. Like, obviously, Ten and Wife, their circumstances have changed a bit because the exhaustion of the whole situation is rearing its head. It's bringing them down. But like I said, they are still the same people making the same content. That's my perception. So I do think that the biggest difference there is that rather than seeing them as like unshakable heroes in a shitty situation, we're now forced to see them as the complex people that they really are. And that's harder to watch. It's less satisfying to watch. And we're like, well, it's messy, so something must be wrong here. We're used to seeing this like unblemished perfection online. So seeing someone with like flaws, we're like, what's happening, you know? So that's one thing. But then also I considered, like, could some of the issues be coming from the language barrier that Ten and Wife have between the majority of their viewers? Because to be completely fair, what they're saying, it doesn't always make perfect sense because they're not totally confident in speaking English. So there are some details that get a little bit muddy, but they do, in my opinion, they communicate well. Like, I've never been super confused about something they've said, but then maybe other people have been confused. So that's something that, it could be happening. And then also naturally, of course, the more videos that Ten and Wife have uploaded, just the more comfortable they've gotten on the platform. And so they explain less of their story in each video. So it's possible, I suppose, that viewers who stumble across their more recent videos, they might find themselves being disillusioned pretty immediately due to their sort of lack of knowledge around the entire situation, because knowing the backstory of Ten and Wife and what their life is like in Korea definitely helps things to make sense. And so as a result of, you know, new people stumbling across this, because their platforms continue to grow, of course, people wind up confused. They're like, well, why is this happening? And why are you doing this? And why are you doing that? And so especially Wife, she finds herself constantly explaining things to people who just don't have the time or refuse to take the time, I suppose, to scroll back through her content to find an answer to something. They just ask it in the comments like, well, why this? And some of these viewers, they're not just inquisitive. They actually want to, like, they take out their magnifying glasses and they squint into each video they come across and they pull it apart in their heads. At times they take statements out of context, I think, or they point out perceived inconsistencies, things that they think they see that don't line up, or they highlight decisions that they reckon make no sense, as if they know the rule book to being a perfect person, right? Like, for example, this is what I've been seeing in the comments, and this is why my head was spinning so much. I'd see, like, you know, well, you drive a Tesla, sell your car and put that money towards the debts. And, you know, sure, that might seem like a pretty sound piece of advice until you take into account the fact that Wife lives rurally. She has to have access to a car in order to take care of her animals and visit her husband and work and literally do anything ever. Selling the car would leave her essentially incapable of living life, and it probably wouldn't even shave off a third of Ten's debt. So that doesn't make sense. And then from there it becomes, well, why don't you both live together in the city? And that seems like a valid question if you don't know the Wife has animals that aren't approved to live in Ten's apartment. And on top of that, breaking Ten's fixed term lease would cost an arm and a leg, so he might as well stay there. But these judgmental sort of problem-solving questions don't stop there. Then it becomes, well, why do you have animals if you're in debt? That one blows my mind. That's very strange and accusatory thing to say, I think, because the assumption is that either taking on the responsibility of pet ownership was something that happened following the debts, or that it's something that can just be waved away after incurring debts, both of which I think are untrue, either factually or morally. And it also fails to recognise the fact that legally, the debt was not incurred by Wife. Wife is not in debt, according to the Korean law. But that one, it goes hand in hand with the criticism that, oh, so your animals are more important than your husband then? Which, again, is a mind-boggling take to me, because for one, it's like, you know that meme that was like, I like waffles. Oh, so you're saying you hate pancakes then? Like, not what she's saying, you know, not even what she's implying. And for two, it's basically, people are saying that wife abandoning her dependents and her stable work and housing and practically everything that she loves and lives for to follow her entirely capable husband, to follow him into the city. They're saying that that's the sensible thing for her to do. I would argue that she actually did the sensible thing by maintaining her stability and continuing to care for the animals that she took responsibility for by adopting. But then I'm sure that even if wife did follow Tien into the city, and if she didn't work anymore and she left her animals behind, then she'd be roasted alive for those decisions as well. I can almost guarantee it. The criticisms of wife are never ending, and it seems like no matter what she does, it's not quite right in the eyes of the viewers. There's always something that wife is doing wrong somehow. And it's just hit me that I think the reason that this has me so pressed is like, this isn't anyone else's situation, so we don't need to comment on what they should be doing. What they're doing is what they're doing. We don't know every single facet of their lives. They've made these decisions for a reason. I don't know. I get heated. I'm gonna get back to the video. But first I'll mention one comment that pops up a lot that I forgot to mention, and that's, why don't you just leave Korea? Like, that's the easy solution for the two of them. I don't know. I think part of the problem is that there is no easy solution, but people are expecting there to be. Like, they're waiting on that simple resolution, the heartwarming ending to the story. That's not reality. It's not going to happen, unfortunately. Well, unless someone comes along and pays all their debts for them. That'd be nice. And when it comes to Tien, at first, people were very supportive of his page. The most he got in the way of criticism was people saying, are you not going to tell us how you got in that much debt? But then he did explain it, and that was it. It was accepted. He was accepted. Until he started showing his human weaknesses. I don't mean to throw a pity party for him, but you've got to phrase it like this is true phrasing, right? This disabled man spent months basically self-destructing himself at a job that his body wasn't fit to handle, trying to tackle the monstrous burden of self-imposed, crippling, inescapable debt. And he's done all of that only to be looked down on by viewers who go on to comment things like, oh, so he's no longer posting or working? Then what is he doing? Plenty of commenters even began to insist that wife should file for divorce, which is something she's emphatically stated that she does not want to do, because, as this one said, he's not doing anything to pay off his debt, and the little he can do with TikTok, he doesn't. Why is she wasting her years living in poverty for a man that doesn't even try? And it's been what? It's been easily less than a month since he's been unemployed, mind you. It's been less than a week since he stopped posting. Like, the lack of empathy, to see that, it just astounded me. Like, I don't know how I'd act in a trying situation like Tien and wife are in, but I'd be willing to bet that I would probably fall on my face at least once under all the stress and pressure of being under insane amounts of debt. So to judge him for having a wee stumble is just such a black and white mindset, I think. Like, of course, I do understand that there are pressing financial issues that need to be addressed, but there's possibilities here. Do you know what I mean? Because Tien hasn't even been posting content, so we don't know what he's doing. He might be working a non-regular job to bring in some extra income, or he could be job hunting, perhaps, because like I said, it hasn't been long since he left his previous job, and we know that it's not as simple as walking into any old building, you know, with your CV and handing it over to the manager and getting hired on the spot. We're all complaining about the job market. I'm assuming it's not great in Korea either. Things take time, you know, but then, or he could also maybe even just be taking a little bit of time to recover from his physical injuries so that he doesn't work himself into a state of disrepair, because that wouldn't be very good in the long term, would it? Or possibly he could just be depressed or feeling defeated due to his circumstances. He could be finding it impossible to even get out of bed. Do you know what I mean? And would you blame him? I mean, the culture in Korea, from what I can gather, seems to be based at least somewhat around, like I said earlier, like competition status. And to fail, I think societally, I'm not saying that everyone sees it this way, but I think as a whole, to fail is to dishonor yourself. It's a shameful thing, and to be surrounded by that socially in the workplace, and now even in his own comment sections on TikTok, when he's tried as well to be this beacon of hope and positivity, I mean, that must be hard to deal with. And Tien has said openly that he feels very ashamed of his position, so I think to assume that he's stepping away from work because he's lazy or good for nothing or he likes to play the victim, that's a big leap to me. I don't know if we've seen enough of that to jump to that conclusion. But of course, in saying all of these things, I don't mean to imply that I can read the situation better than anyone else can. All I mean to do is, I mean to, like, these factors are possible enough that it would be disingenuous, I think, to ignore them when passing judgment. We don't know what's going on, so we can't say that he's this, that, or the other thing. We're not there. And to be fair, on the other side of things, 10 might be doing fine. Actually, he might be involved in a whole new venture that he's starting behind the scenes, or like, it's not fair to assume that just because we're not seeing something, it's not happening. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. First, I wanted to touch on the time that people thought that they saw right through 10's ploy, his big scam, when he showed his freezer. And it was full. Ugh, the horror. Of course, poor people, they can't have food in their house. Unheard of. But to the delight of skeptics, I'm sure, 10 quickly cleared up people's confusion. His freezer was full, but it was almost completely void of real food. Because it turns out that in Korea, people keep their food scraps, well, some people keep them elsewhere, but a lot of people keep them in the freezer so they don't go rotten and smell gross until the appropriate waste disposal day. And food waste recycling is serious business in Korea. Apparently, you can get fined or publicly humiliated if you don't abide by the rules. So that's why 10's freezer looked like it was stocked. Not that it would be a real issue if his tiny little freezer was full with food in the first place, in my opinion. Like, so he's got ready-made meals, or he's got food that he can heat up at home. Isn't that's like how you save money, eating at home? Apparently eating out in Korea can actually be quite cheap, so that might not be true in their region of the world. But in my mind, I was like, well, having a full freezer doesn't really imply anything other than, you know, you just went grocery shopping. But then finally, I want to talk about the health skeptics, because in my mind, they were sort of the first straw that broke the camel's back when it came to wife. Because basically, obviously, we know that 10 is a disabled man. He was in a wheelchair for a couple of years in his 20s, but wife shared that she had an autoimmune disease with her followers, which they didn't know before, but we know already. And some watchers became very cynical. They expressed their disbelief that more and more was being added to this story. And so it's as if that some viewers could only imagine things happening to this couple in a vacuum because they were in debt and 10 was disabled already. Wife couldn't also have a health condition. I don't know. Wife reiterated to her followers that their lives are far more expansive than the small sort of snippet that we see online. And, you know, the fact that some viewers think that they're being fake because they experience more than one hardship. She was kind of disappointed by that, is pretty much what she said. She kind of drilled it in. She was like, so many people are going through more than you could ever know, which I think is a great lesson that she sort of fed to her viewers. But the really frustrating thing for me as a viewer is to see two people that I really perceive, I perceive them as being authentic and sincere, to see them getting dogpiled by accusatory critics that get thousands upon thousands of likes for harping on about things that have, by and large, already been explained. Every time I open their comment sections, I regret it, but I still do it every time because it used to be at least reasonably wholesome in there. Now something's changed. I sit there and I furrow my brow and I'm like, what? And what gets me, right, is that 10 and wife, they're not these like idealistic influences. They've never even tried to apply that their life is glamorous or easy, or literally that they're anything more than the average people, I guess, multiple people, doing their best to cope in the face of a really difficult situation. That's all they've ever claimed to be. But as much as the pendulum has swung in favour of authentic content creators as of late, curiously, watching two normal everyday people going through an extraordinary situation doesn't sit right with a lot of 10 and wife's viewers. They expect more, they expect better. And I definitely understand that you might have your guard up first coming across their page when you see that, you know, they're struggling financially and they're showing it, they're accepting donations. They don't really push the donations, but they are there. So I understand that people might think, oh, they're faking their circumstances, they're fraudulently trying to acquire donations from their viewers, or, you know, like I said, the scam where Korean husbands maybe get into gambling debt and their wives are trapped, I don't know. But like I said, I've been around for a couple of months watching their content and I really haven't seen any reason to believe that there's something malicious going on behind the scenes. Not that I know, I don't know. But also, that's not necessarily what people are commenting about. They're commenting about more than the reality of the situation. Like, the more their platforms have grown, the more I've seen commenters trying to spin thin air into drama. Like, we have a breadcrumb, and they're like, I've baked a whole loaf of bread out of this. I know exactly what's going on here. And I think, to be fair, what I've seen, and the reason that's sort of like shaken me, is, you know, I was around before 10 and Wife's platforms got as large as they are. And as communities grow and more viewers become aware of a page, right, it's pretty typical that parts of that community or parts of at least the comment sections when the videos sort of reach external crowds, some of them start to become rotten, which is natural. Like, the more human beings are introduced to each other, there's going to be conflict. Everyone has different opinions. They might disagree with something, you know, the creator has done, or what another commenter has said. They kick up a fuss over it. Suddenly you've got a wee argument. And you can't please everyone. It's a very simple phrase, but it's true. So your content will always receive some backlash. It's bound to happen. And I've even seen it firsthand, the effect that like reaching further and further pools of audiences can have on, because I love reading my comment sections. I love going through them and seeing all the familiar faces or names, seeing what everyone has to say, any details they have to share, but I'll steer clear of any of my comment sections on videos that reach more than maybe like even 30,000 or 40,000 views, because my resting point is probably around 15,000 to 20,000 views. And just for whatever reason, the bigger the community gets, the more nasty people get. And like I said, I guess it is an algorithm thing to some extent. So like, as the pool of people that your content reaches expands, the more unique preferences you're going to need to satisfy, right? Because you're getting introduced to this new pool of people that might have like an adjacent interest, or, you know, basically with that diversity brings more contention. It's going to happen. And I think with Ten and Wife, that's sort of clear that that's what's happening based on the criticisms that make their way to them. For example, like they'll say Wife is doing too much for Ten and she should leave him, or they'll say that she's not selfish for doing more and being closer to him. They'll say that Ten needs to take better care of himself and that he deserves comfort, and then they'll criticize him for stepping away from a destructive job and buying himself an affordable cooking appliance that won't shock him. It's not every commenter, but it's a vocal few at least, and I think probably that is to do with the fact that they're just reaching so many more people, right? So naturally you're going to have a bunch of different opinions coming in. And I guess some of this, in saying that, can be chalked up to just cultural differences or ignorance to their culture, I suppose. Because of course, a lot of Ten and Wife's lived experiences, they won't make sense to you if you live in a completely different region than they do, with different laws and regulations and lifestyles and cultures, because it's different. But this is where I come back to the air fryer. Because remember how Ten emphasized that his air fryer purchase, it was going to surprise Wife when she saw the TikTok that he made about it? Well, when he posted twice the next day. One was just a normal vlog. He went to Busan, he was visiting a hospital, and the next was that post telling his followers that he needed a break. Well, guess what some viewers drew a connection to? Do you think it was the fact that he went to hospital that day to be assessed for his knee and back pain? Or do you think it was the fact that he and his wife are both under a metric ton of pressure and stress? No, they drew a connection between Ten stepping away from TikTok and his secret air fryer purchase. And that's what inspired me to make this video. I was like, I need to explore this, because how does that make any, like, we've seen what these people are living through and the judgment they're under. Do we really think it's the air fryer that drew this big wedge between them? Like, I saw this comment thread, it made me want to build a shack in the middle of the woods and live there for the rest of my life. I was like, oh my god. This reads, she got upset about the air fryer, and it was followed by the response, if that's the case, then maybe she shouldn't have taken in so many animals. Like, if you're struggling that much, why are you taking in so many animals when you can barely feed yourself, assuming they're being honest? We've spoken about this. I don't need to explain it, but Ten and Wife, they were all over this comment section correcting the narrative that no, of course Wife was not so angry about Ten buying an air fryer so that he could cook proper meals safely that he had to quit TikTok over it. Oh my god. It barely makes it doesn't even make a shred of sense. So again, right, to me, I was like, people are looking at this situation very much in a vacuum. Whatever we see has to tie together somehow, is what they think. Like, they're drawing these like string lines to, oh, well, this happened and then this happened, but like, it's not. I don't know, I'll get to that. What I want to say first is that that's fine. It is a fine thing to do. Like, it's natural human behavior to pass quick judgment about things using the details we have. Well, our brains do it all the time, right? Because it would be genuinely impossible for us to deeply analyze every little thing in our lives. If I was filming this video and instead of actually speaking, I was just caught up in assessing every little aspect of the camera, like, oh, the lens is very round, you know, you'd have no time or brain space for anything else. So while this method, it doesn't always lead us to the greatest of conclusions, right? So instead of assessing this and me being like, it's a Canon point and shoot camera, my brain will just be like, a camera. That's good enough. Normally, our quick conclusions are good enough, and so our brains continue to make them because it is efficient. But the issue that I see here is that usually these quick judgments that we make, they exist solely in our minds, or they maybe they'd verbalize as like a passing word to friends and they'd just blow away in the wind. But online, in comment sections, they make a real impact on people. You can take a half-baked thought and type it out in seconds and hit post and forget about it, just move on with your day, and it could haunt the person you're speaking about for days. And there are some scientific theories behind our tendency to be a little bit more cruel or blasé when we're sort of typing to figures on our screen compared to when we're really talking to somebody in person. In short, an article on ResearchGate cites dissociative anonymity, invisibility, asynchronicity,
soliplistic
introjection, dissociative imagination, and minimization of authority as factors that could allow us to be disinhibited when we're typing to strangers online. So basically, as a really quick explanation, an anonymous person behind a username, anonymous profile picture, disappearing in a crowd amongst other faceless people, commenting on something that happened in the past. They're talking to a person, right, whose expressions and body language they can't read, and they perceive that they're on an even playing field, just one internet stranger talking to another internet stranger online, and there's no hierarchy there. They might feel that the impact that they have by making a comment is almost fictional, like it doesn't feel real. But it's not fictional, that's the thing, right? Your brain might lead you to believe that your actions don't have consequences online the way they do when you're speaking to a friend in person, or when you are interacting with the receptionist at the dentist office, you know what I mean? But they do, and to be fair, they might not have an impact on you and your life. In reality, the fact is that even though that might be true, what you're saying isn't just shooting off into a void. It's sitting in front of sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, and it's impacting each and every one of them in some way or another. And in this case, it is obvious that the comments are affecting Ten and Wife because they're pretty open about it, to be honest. And yet, no matter how many times they remind the audience that they're just people and that things happen off camera, you know, they have the same 24 hours in a day that we all do, and we see a minute of it. They work and they talk and they have their own personal time together and apart that we don't see. It's not easy for everybody to accept or to recognize that as being fact for some reason. And that really piqued my interest because in my mind, that's like a pretty low level empathetic sort of thing. Like, we are all human beings with lives, I would assume. So naturally, in my mind, right, this is my connection that I make, is we all understand that other people are also human beings with lives. I have it, so you have it. So that got me thinking, you know, what makes social media any different than the real world in that way? And we already spoke about the comments a little bit. What changes about how we perceive the content? Well, I had a couple of theories, and they are just theories, but my first was that perhaps we've been almost primed to expect fake content online at this point, because engagement has become the most valuable currency on social media, and creators and influencers will do anything really to up their numbers, won't they? From rage bait to contradicting statements to misspellings to total untruths, we've seen it all. Everyone wants your attention online, and it feels like they all want to sell you something too, or they want to make money off of you in some other way. And now we've got AI posts littering the internet as well, so it's just harder and harder to trust anything that you see online anymore, isn't it? Even on Facebook, like, you scroll down your timeline and your friend has shared a Minion meme and you're like, oh, I really thought you had a good sense of humour. You just can't believe your own mind at this point. I love a good Minion meme, it's fine. But also, to be fair, conspiracy theorists exist. They're everywhere, not just online. I don't mean to compare a little drop in the ocean like this to something like, I don't know, the earth being flat. But comments like, well, okay, so wife posted this video. It literally begins with, when my husband didn't have $300,000 of debt. She literally prefaced this video by explaining that it was an old video from another time in her life, and there was this comment. It read, looks like you all got more food than me in the USA and living better than me. I have contacted the US Embassy in Korea about this, and it's a lie. That made me think that, you know, some people just like to be wrapped up in theories. It's just comfortable for them. At that point, you're just theorizing for the sake of theorizing. That's what I'm seeing. Like, you want to feel like there's something greater going on that you're privy to and you have the knowledge, or you want the attention, or you just want to stir up drama to like relish in the aftermath. I don't know. That could be a troll. It could be a conspiracy. That's so far-fetched that I almost feel like it's a troll, but I hope you understand the point I'm making. Either way, I am just riffing here. Like, I'm thinking out loud, basically. And don't get me wrong, like, I can't flawlessly tell what's real and what's fake online. If Ten and Wife came out tomorrow and they said that they orchestrated this whole thing because they wanted to start their own business and they wanted a following, or they wanted to get donations, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be entirely surprised. I see no reason to distrust the important points of their story, but I also don't really know any better. Do you know what I mean? We don't know anyone that we're seeing online. Not really. I just don't see the suspicious inconsistencies that people harp on about. Like I said, I understand that their public presence could be a very elaborate scam, but until I see definitive proof, I don't see the point of delving into that. I don't believe it to be true, personally. But what's really interesting to me is, beyond that, it's just seeing people approach content so cynically that really, I don't know, it captured me. It's just a reminder, you know, social media algorithms and a lot of creators as well, they play into our emotions and negativity bias and things like that so well that I don't even know if we fully recognize when it's happening all the time. I don't know if we can fully comprehend what they're doing. We just get sucked in. Like, it's addicting, and it really, I think it changes the way that you experience life in general. When you exercise those parts of your brain too much, you just start to approach everything with this like suspicious mindset, or you're expecting negativity. I don't know. On that note, that theory that we are sort of expecting orchestrated content when we're scrolling on social media, that led me to consider whether or not we might be kind of approaching creator-made content as if it's a TV series of sorts, rather than real life now. Like, we'll watch a vlog, right, and we'll perceive it as being more like a reality show, or even like an episode of Friends, rather than being just a day that they've really had in real life. And I don't have any proof that this is how we're perceiving things, but it just makes sense to me because it actually kind of seems to be the direction that content is heading in online. Take vlogs, for example, like I just mentioned. In my mind, they sort of evolved from they were very calm, right? They were relatively low effort at the beginning of things, what we might call boring now, even. You know, they were filled with real day-to-day clips of YouTubers who were filming their days. It was like the likes of the Brick Crew might have shared. Like, it was very, looking back now, it's like, oh, this is kind of lame, but it was nice, I guess, at the time. Vlogs went from that to being dominated by high energy and honestly very much planned, like engagement focused vlogs. We're talking like David Dobrik, Logan and Jake Paul. You could even maybe put Emma Chamberlain into that category to some extent. And then now vlogs have been very much Mr. Beastified, if you will, or they're very professional and tactical and influencer coded almost. Like, they have entire storylines driven by retention techniques, or they have that influencer accent that makes people stick around to see what they have to say for longer. So perhaps I wonder if rather than being primed to be lied to, or even hand in hand with that, we're sort of more so primed to be very entertained online now. Like, we expect to have our emotions stirred up, you know what I mean? Because social media apps do hold our attention by feeding us content that makes us feel strong emotions, that gets us riled up. You know, they want us to feel, especially negative ones, because they're even stronger than positive ones. So stuff like anger, deep sadness, regret, self-hatred, FOMO, disagreement, that makes us stick around for longer because we become emotionally invested in what we're seeing. And a lot of content creators lean into that because they know that if they succeed, their growth chart will look like a ramp to the moon. Like, they'll be really, really successful. But some content creators like Ten and like Wife, they haven't really bought into the new style of content creation. They still run their platforms in a way that fosters connection rather than extreme emotion. The idea behind their content is kind of that we simply have the chance to take a non-invasive glance into a few minutes of their lives, and in exchange, we become a part of it to some extent. We become a part of their lives and they become a part of ours. And even though that's nice, that doesn't necessarily alter our expectations. And so we spend our time consciously or subconsciously analysing their content, trying to piece together drama or identify the next plot twist. And like I said, this is just a theory, this is just me thinking, but it does seem like we follow the plot that's laid out for us, like we're watching a TV show. Like, to us, the only reality that they live in is the one that we see, because as far as we know, as far as our brains can comprehend, nothing happens beyond the camera. To us, these people are simply characters. They don't exist. They're playing a part. But then when the storyline gets inevitably boring, or it starts becoming, you know, a bit illogical, in other words, when it gets to be too human, we start frantically searching for the excitement, for the hidden messages, for the logic in it all. Of course, we think someone has to have done something drastically bad or stupid, or in this case, for example, they're upset about the air fryer, because that's just what makes sense to us. So we start writing our own scripts to fill the void, basically. Sorry, my camera died. I'm almost done. It's okay. I'm sorry. I am saving up for a battery. We're getting close, team. But again, I'm literally just theorizing here. I'd love to hear what you think. My final thought on this is that it really really reminded me of how supportive we can be of the concept of mental health, but how dismissive we can be once someone displays symptoms that aren't pretty. It's all fun and games until someone stops conforming with the expectations we have of them, basically. Like when Ten and wife were working together as a team and maintaining unwavering strength and positivity in the face of hardship, and basically being perfect victims of their circumstances. All was well and good. We loved it. Support was coming in from all corners. Commenters had glowing reviews of them and their content. But as soon as the cracks started to form, right as soon as the weight of their situation buckled their knees, suddenly people, not all of them, but some of them, were disgusted by them and they got skeptical of them. At that point, the reality that I saw was that there was literally no way that they could act and nothing that they could do to impress their viewers. It was perfection or bust. And unfortunately, perfection, like candid, unpracticed perfection is simply not possible. It's not achievable for human beings, not real human beings. And the sad thing is that people struggle with this daily, not just online, but in real life as well. Like a recovering addict is held in high regard by their peers until they relapse, and then people tend to turn a cold shoulder. Say a person with anxiety, that's all well and good until their condition gets so severe that they can't leave the house. They have to go on the benefit. Now they're looked down on by society. A mental illness sufferer they're brave for sharing that they were unable to get out of bed for a whole day, but then they're crazy if they had to be hospitalized for a year. That's how we perceive them. And even on a smaller, sort of less dramatic scale, we tell people that we're here if they need to talk. But when they do talk, they're a burden. Basically, the message that we send, I think, is that we care as long as you're functional, as long as you're being strong to an unreal degree. And in saying that, I don't mean to villainize people that aren't prepared or equipped to deal with other people's mental illnesses or their hardships. And I don't even mean to separate myself from them, because of course everything that I speak about, I'm included in. I'm a human as well. And the fact is, there are mental professionals trained to handle these things for a reason. They're not easy things to tackle. But of course, I think the thing is that, most of us can relate or understand what it's like to experience mild symptoms of mental illness or to run into reasonably small issues in real life. But then, of course, more severe cases are bound to put our empathy to the test and throw us for a loop because they're out of our depth. Most of us don't experience really intense hardship in all forms that can come in. Do you know what I mean? I also think, I guess it's a lot easier to watch and support someone when they're doing well than it is, when they're crumbling in front of you and you're helpless to stop it. That's kind of undeniable, right? As one is more enjoyable than the other and one is easier to approach than the other. And I think just as humans, we might find predictability to be more attractive than unpredictability. It makes more sense to us. And I mean attractive as in like appealing, like enticing, not as in hot, because that's a whole nother topic. But my point is, right, is that it seems like we can be all for supporting people until it gets ugly. It's lovely to watch someone be their authentic self until they disappoint us with their authenticity. But what's crazy to see, for me, is how fast people will turn on someone that doesn't appeal to them in a pleasant way anymore. Like on Ten's page, the general consensus went from, you'll be okay, you're so inspiring, keep up the great work, you have thousands of supporters that believe in you, to comments like, all he has to do is hold the camera and read a script that his wife makes for him. It's not like he's working. And seemingly, in my mind, that happened overnight. But to be fair, that's Ten's page. On wife's page, the comments have always skewed a little more negative from what I've seen. It's gone from, you should leave him, to would he do the same for you, to why won't you abandon your pets, to why do you say you're not in debt if you're married, to why aren't you living with him, to I doubt there's even a debt, it's just your business model, to all I hear are excuses, even why do you make food for him, he can just make his own. It's everything. And it's coming from both angles too. Wife has just always had this plethora of criticism lodged against her, and it's baffled me. And like, I don't mean to be cruel in saying this by any means, but I could understand a little criticism towards Ten, considering that he was the one that incurred the massive debts. I wouldn't encourage it or endorse it because of course he regrets it. Like, he took a chance on what he thought was a great idea and it fell through. He doesn't want to be in all this debt. So I guess I think it's a bit pointless to like look back in hindsight and comment on Ten's character. It's not very helpful, I suppose. Sure, he thinks about that enough himself, but all I'm saying is that those kinds of comments wouldn't make me scratch my head in the way that the comments on wife's pages do. I'm like, why? And thinking about it, I guess that the reality could be that in the end, the reason we might have felt so much warmth towards Ten is because He made us feel better about ourselves and our circumstances. Like, he got himself in a hole financially, right? So on the social hierarchy, we might feel like he's beneath us. And that could boost our self-esteem as per the social comparison theory. And then also the fact that we're supporting him, even though, you know, back when I first started watching, he seemed very strong. He seemed like he was very much supporting himself. It's easy to get behind someone like that. It's easy to be like, you got this, and then move on, right? It's not hard to show that support, but it does make you feel morally good. And on top of that, he really is inspiring. You know, a lot of us can relate to feeling trapped in the rat race and forced to work jobs that we hate for survival. So to see that Tien, right, in such a terrible situation, can recognize and accept his shortcomings and work to improve his situation and still have his wife stick by him as well. Not only is that fulfilling to watch, it also is inspiring. But no matter why we were watching, because I can't say for sure, all I know is that we were happily watching until things started going downhill, I guess. But then as for the endless disdain towards wife, I have no idea what the catalyst of that could be. I possibly am a bit short-sighted because, like I said, I watch their content. It's just that her existence on TikTok, as far as I've seen, in my perspective, has been entirely inoffensive, and so I'm just baffled as to why she's catching so much heat. I don't know, I wonder if it's possibly because her situation doesn't invite that same, like the same warm sort of fuzzy feelings that Tien's does, because she is in a really depressing situation through none of her own doing, right? And yet she stayed loyal to her husband, the person who, if you view it this way, has put her in that situation. Do you know what I mean? So wife is essentially breaking her back. She's putting herself through hell to support him and herself and her animals. Wife is doing everything in her power to help their relationship survive. And it's not pretty, is it? It's hard to watch, and it's hard to accept that someone could be so in love that they'd be willing to stick it out through such an awful situation. That's less inspiring for a lot of people to see, I guess, and more devastating. But I also wonder if it could have something to do with the fact that wife stays busy interacting with people in her comment sections, even in the videos themselves, she'll address comments. Like, possibly it's one of those ignore them so they go away kinds of situations where by drawing attention to the negativity, she's also sort of unintentionally driving the negativity. It just seems like the more that she explains, or the more that she adds to her story, as people seem to say, the more people don't believe her and they tell her that. So maybe it's just because it's going to get a rise out of her. I don't know. I've also noticed, and this is literally just like a personal anecdote, but I've noticed that some women online seem to be compelled to criticize other women online. Just from their behaviors to their appearance to the way they speak, it just brings them some sort of fulfillment to do that. I don't mean to say that that's something that solely women do by any means, or that every woman does, also not what I'm saying. I'm thinking, you know, when you look at, for example, snark pages, you'll find that they tend to be communities that are dominated by women hurling bottom of the barrel insults at other women. So that's where that thought came from for me. And this might tie into, like, could people who have been hurt or burdened in relationships with men sort of be projecting their experiences onto wife? Because that could explain all the comments that insist that, like, divorce is the only option in this situation, and they question whether Tien would do the same for her, despite wife's explanations that they're very much in love, she'd like to stay, and they actually have a history of supporting each other. I don't know. I know this is a very drastic situation, but wife is a grown woman, right? She can make her own decisions. She's told us her reasoning, and yet people are sort of like disregarding what she says to stick to their guns that she should leave him. And I guess that could possibly be why. Maybe they've been burned. Because I'm not saying their advice is terrible by any means. Like, sure, if your partner's in debt and you want to step away, I'm not going to say you're the evil incarnate, right? Look after yourself. It's just that their advice is very much unsolicited, and she's kind of made that clear, and they don't stop. So I'm just thinking. Either way, I can't definitively say why, but from what I've gathered, I really do think that wife would get flack no matter what she did. If she left, she'd be accused of being a bad wife. And yet somehow the fact that she stayed has also made her a bad wife. Not on Tien's page though. On his page, I've seen people celebrating the love that she has for him, telling him, you know, he is a great woman behind him. I've even seen comments being like, if she leaves, she's selfish. If she leaves, she's like preying on your downfall. Do you know what I mean? But then on her page, not so much. Opposite narrative. I don't get it. I don't know. I've really racked my brain. I've scrolled through the comments on so many of her videos and I just can't place it. Like, I've told you my theories. If you have any thoughts around it, please let me know because I'd love to hear them. But I came across this comment on wife's page that I felt had a nice sentiment, I suppose, to sort of start to close things up on. And it read, Korea has one of the highest debt in the world. So I don't think it's shameful to speak about it, but the opposite. It's brave because so many people suffer in silence or feel alone. You and your husband are doing something amazing by talking about this topic that is a common problem in society. More people should be like this on social media. I respect both of you. And in the end, I agree with that commenter. I think that too often we spend our time online looking for people to idolize or to compare ourselves to, when the reality is that creators are people just like we are. The value that creators provide, I think, isn't an aspirational lifestyle showing that to us. I think it's more so the insight into other people's thoughts and their lived experiences that we can see through them that has so much value. Like, through creators we can learn about ourselves and other people in the world, and that's special. And we don't get to learn through them because they're perfect or all-knowing. Nothing like that. It's more so because they're not. But I'm gonna see, I've charged my battery a little bit, so I'm gonna see if I can do the outro, like the closing thoughts, with my camera on. Let's see. I'm back. Hopefully this lasts. To round off this story for now, let me tell you where Ten and wife are at in life. So it sounds like they're looking into starting a new venture. Wife announced just recently that she's actually decided to take on $35,000 worth of debt to start her own licensed travel business as a last resort of sorts, even though she said that she's not the type to borrow money, because humans make no sense and life is messy. Case in point, right? But this didn't come from out of nowhere. To be clear, wife has done guided tours as a side hustle for quite some time, not only because the tourism business is booming where she lives, but also because she has a real passion for showing people the beauty of Korea. She loves where she's chosen to live. So to open her own sort of travel tour company, it's been a dream of hers for a while, and it's something that she and Ten have been discussing in depth. But as always, it would be a big risk, right? It's a scary thing to take on. Even licenses in Korea can cost tens of thousands of dollars, so starting a business like she wants to it's no small feat. But now, finally, thanks to the support of their TikTok followers, wife can imagine the business becoming successful, and that's the duality of virality, right? Of growth online, is you've got all these people judging you and criticizing you, and then you've got these supporters that make so many things possible. But now wife feels like the business, her business idea, would have a lot of earning potential, really, and she thinks it might open the door to some more freedom and stability and independence for herself. So it would help both Ten with his debts and her and her life. And listen, personally, not that anyone asked, I think it's risky to take out more debts in their situation. We just spoke about the statistics behind small businesses in Korea. It's definitely concerning, but wife knows that. Like I said, she's a grown woman. She can make her own decisions. She said it herself. It's risky. And honestly, I think their mindset is probably like, how much further could we fall? Like, if we're not going to take this chance, then what are we going to do? And that's fair enough. She's got her dreams. She's going to see him through. I respect it. She's got to see for herself what's on the other side. Nobody can look into the future and tell her. And what wife has explained is she said, I will open a business license, then it will have no any connection to husband, and I can earn much. So basically, her business can make the money, and it'll be a detached entity, if that makes sense. And so theoretically, it could be their get out of jail free card, all things going well. I do understand their train of thought, and I hope it works out for them. And I will say that on this particular video, wife's comment section it's overflowing with support. Like, commenters are sharing their ideas with her in a really like polite, engaged way. They're congratulating her, they're saying they're proud, they're wishing her luck. Some are even saying that they'd love to visit Korea and take a guided tour with her, that they trust her, which is great. I love to see it, but I just wonder, like, where has that kind of supportive response been? Where have these well-intentioned messages been? Like, there's always been a few. It's just never been overwhelming like this. It's like every comment. And I get that it's empowering to see wife sort of take her life by the reins in such a big way, but she's been doing this. I guess just a more like, I guess you could say less exciting ways. I don't know. Either way, I wish Ten and wife nothing but the absolute best. And I just hope they can repair their relationship after Ten bought that air fryer. God, must be hard. But all jokes aside, that's all I wanted to talk about when it came to my $10 life and Debt Wife Diaries on TikTok. And honestly, I barely use TikTok. Like, I am not a big social media girl, but ever since I found them, I will literally open the app, check their accounts, close the app. I just want to see what they're up to. I am rooting for them. Do you know what I mean? I love how real and authentic they seem. I've really been leaning towards those like candid content creators, especially smaller YouTubers are great for it, like smaller vloggers and stuff like that. I'm like, girl, you are just normal. I love it. I just hate, because I went through my Instagram stories the other day, and it was all, you know, the influencers and celebrities and friends that I follow. And obviously friends, I just like to see what they're up to, but influencers and celebrities, you do find yourself thinking like, my life doesn't look like that, but it doesn't have to. Their life probably doesn't look like that either. So I like to keep my distance from social media, but there are good pockets of it. Let me actually, on that subject, let me check what Ten and wife are up to. I don't know if they've posted anything. I don't want to miss something. Ten has not posted again. Oh, wife has. Oh my gosh. Okay. Update. She can't get a business loan, wife can't, in Korea because it's very difficult for foreigners to get a loan, which I kind of thought might be an issue that she would run into. So they're going to find another way to source $35,000 if they can. But awesome updates. 1, Tina's back from Busan, and 2, wife's twin sister is coming to visit. I had no idea she even had a twin sister, so I'm excited. I wonder if they're going to film some content together. I'm definitely not trying to encourage you to follow them on TikTok. In the comments, someone's saying that probably taking on more debt is not a smart idea. Someone is saying the problem is that he got you into debt and now he shows a lack of motivation and maturity to get out of it. And there are people in the comments saying, you know, he is disabled and swimming in stress, so maybe give him a bit of a breather. But I'm glad to see that, you know, there are some things that wife is looking forward to. She's still seeking out mental health assistance. I really, really, really hope that things go well for them. I really do. But I do hope that you enjoyed this video. I'm so sorry. I know this isn't my normal style of content by any means, but I just got sucked in. I really like to dissect just stuff. And this stuff called to me. It's like, I need to figure out what's going on here. But as always, I truly, truly, truly appreciate your time so much. And I'm just glad that we could spend some time together. I even get to say goodbye to you because my battery charged just enough for me to get to the outro. It's still blinking red, but it's fine. But yeah, I hope that you're taking care of yourself and the people around you, and I hope life is treating you well. If not, hang in there because it will come around. And I hope you have a lovely, lovely day. I guess I'll see you again, maybe. Why is it always so hard to say goodbye? I never know what to say, but thank you. I do appreciate it. And I will see you later. Bye. Bye.